It's 4:20 somewhere, and right now that somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to the Cannabis Show. My name is producer Vince, and here's your host, Ricardo Baca.
Vince, thank you for that, man. And to everybody joining us today, welcome to the Cannabist Show, where we talk about all things weed.
Hashtag all things weed.
That is the serious marijuana news and the fun stuff as well. In fact, if you pop onto the site right now, you can read stories about President Barack Obama granting 79 more commutations to nonviolent federal inmates.
And that pushes that total past 1,000 commutations for President Obama.
You can read about some desperate medical pot patients in Montana who are seeking the immediate reopening of the state's marijuana dispensaries.
And not just because they live in Montana.
And about what a potential Attorney General Jeff Sessions might mean for marijuana legalization efforts in New Jersey.
And California and Colorado and everywhere. Everybody seems to be concerned right now.
Producer Vince, how you doing, man?
You know, I'm incredibly well. Thanks, Ricardo. I survived Thanksgiving. That's what that holiday was, right? I'm ready to go, start rolling into these winter holidays here, build myself up. How are you doing, Ricardo?
You survived Thanksgiving.
Survived.
What was so difficult about it?
Well, you know, waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning and having to actually clean my kitchen for the first time since last Thanksgiving was probably one of it, to start cleaning that, cooking that feast. But, you know, friends over, socializing. I'd much rather just watch the new Gilmore Girls update, you know, revival and just relax, bro.
Yeah, I'm totally behind on the Gilmore Girls thing, I will say.
Skip the last one.
You know, I haven't started the first one, so I don't know. I've heard that a lot of folks are into it, and I heard there were some mixed reactions to this new one, but no.
Hashtag all things Gilmore.
Oh man, no, not on this show, because I will have no idea what you're talking about. But Vince, it is time to jump right into the Week in Weed, and we are starting this Week in Weed in New York City, where the first cannabis business to land a listing on the New York Stock Exchange is likely going public very soon.
We skipped the part where Tech Surge plays and the thing scrolls and we get into the Week in Weed, but all you have heard about the over-the-counter market, where most of the weed companies trade their pink sheets and you can buy shares for 1/10 of a cent. But this marijuana company is debuting on the Big Daddy, the Granddaddy, the New York Stock Exchange.
Indeed. You know, the business is Innovative Industrial Properties, and it's a California-based real estate investment trust, and it's for medical cannabis facilities. And the REIT, that's a real estate investment trust, plans to offer 5 million shares at $20 per share. That's according to a filing made with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission.
And if you, like me, were wondering what a REIT is, it's a real estate investment trust, and that means it's a company that owns or finances income-producing real estate.
It's a fun fact here at the Cannabis Show.
Hashtag all things fun facts.
And here's why this is substantial news for the legalization movement. One financial analyst told us, quote, "Getting NYSE clearance means there's at least one less hurdle for cannabis IPOs in the future."
You know, for years I've been pronouncing NYSE just nice. Apparently I've been wrong.
Nice.
Another industry insider involved in the transaction told Forbes that the deal will, quote, "be the very first opportunity for institutional investors to comfortably generate exposure to an industry that currently lacks the sort of transparency that SEC oversight provides."
You know, elsewhere in the Week in Weed, Vince, we look due west of our Denver studios to Aspen, Colorado, where one of the mountain town's most noteworthy residents is getting into the weed business, and he's doing so posthumously.
Back from the grave and into the pot shops. In fact, let's have a mini pot quiz right here and now to see if any of our listeners know who we're talking about. Here are your clues. He lived and died just outside of Aspen in a town called Woody Creek. He was a journalist and an author, and he loved weed, guns, and he practiced what he called gonzo journalism.
Gonzo. I know our readers, and I'm guessing most of them know we're talking about the late, great Hunter S. Thompson, and now Thompson's widow, Anita Thompson. She says that a gonzo brand of cannabis will soon be sold in recreational marijuana shops.
You know, what's interesting about this celebrity licensing deal is that Thompson's widow saved 6 different strains of cannabis that the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas author actually smoked. And now she's working with a pot company to grow these strains or hybrids of them and actually sell them to the public.
You know, Anita Thompson has said she's taken 10 meetings, at least 10 meetings in the last 3 years with weed growers, but it's never felt quite right until this specific deal came through.
And Ricardo, this quote from Anita Thompson left more than a few of us scratching our heads. Quote, "I'm looking forward to being a drug lord."
I know. I read the same thing. I was just like, what are you doing? Okay, it's legal. Anyway, finally, here is our colleague Alicia Wallace with this week's Quick Hit.
Colorado's governor says he's doubling down on efforts to reduce homelessness across the state, and he wants to use a big chunk of marijuana tax revenue to further his cause. Governor John Hickenlooper's state budget plan calls for $12.3 million in tax revenue from legal marijuana sales to be put toward new housing for people who experience chronic and episodic homelessness. The proposal for fiscal year 2017 to 2018 also asks that another $4 million in marijuana funds be used to provide shelter and help for people with behavioral health issues. Colorado's homeless population increased 6% from last year, and at 10,000 people, it is the 7th largest in the nation. The state's supply of year-round beds for the homeless falls short by more than 3,000. Hickenlooper's proposal would create a new avenue for how marijuana taxes are spent. The state currently allocates pot taxes for areas such as school construction projects, law enforcement, health education, and substance abuse prevention and treatment programs. For The Cannabist, I'm Alicia Wallace with this week's Quick Hit.
All right, thank you, Alicia. And now it's time to bring out our first guest, who is the outgoing president of the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. Here to tell us what's going on, let's welcome Tyler Henson back to the Cannabist Show. Hey man, how's it going?
Good, how are you doing?
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, when were you last on? Was it earlier this year or last year?
I think it was last year.
We have a
I
new
think it was
mugs.
going and got brand new mugs.
We have a new
much
set.
fancier,
We had 4
looking
panels
good.
last time he was on the show.
Yeah, you guys are moving up in the world. This is amazing.
We're doing our best, man. We're
Yeah.
doing the best.
Well, that's what I hear. You guys are doing a pretty rock solid job.
Well, but yeah, we're trying.
Yeah.
Big changes afoot in your world, man. But before
Yeah.
we do that, let's talk about some of the things that stay the same. Are you an indica or a sativa man, Tyler?
I think, you asked me that first question when I first came, and I wasn't, I guess, the cannabis savant or connoisseur. A lot of people in the industry, but I'm not to stick with my original response back then, which is an indica.
Still, okay.
Yeah, I think sativa just, it makes my brain race too much, and then it makes me think about things I potentially forgot. So an indica, at the end of the day is, that's a good remedy for me.
There you go. I dig it. This is going to be news to a lot of our listeners, but as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, after 2 years as the president of C4, the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, you are leaving the industry group and the industry. So tell us what's going on in your world, man.
Yeah. So, and it's been a wonderful ride these 2 years, and it's something that I took to heart and took a long time to think about actually stepping down from my position here. C4 itself, from its infancy, from its starting point with only 4 members, when I got brought on, marijuana wasn't something I thought about. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd ever be in this industry, but a situation, it approached myself and I saw it, and, this industry needed a lot of work. It needed a lot of help, especially at the state capitol. There was this industry, great people in it there, but they didn't really know how to adapt and how to address the culture of the state capitol, how legislation's done, and they're kind of left holding the bag. And looking across the entire state of Colorado, not just Denver where the majority of licenses are, but the outlets going down into Trinidad, into Pueblo,
Sure.
up into the mountain regions like Salida and stuff. This industry needed a lot of help and needed a lot of representation, and so I made that leap to jump into, and it's been phenomenal. Since I became on to C4, we were the smallest organization. Now we're the largest business association in the state of Colorado.
Really?
For the licensed, yes,
Oh,
licensed
wow,
regulated
congrats.
marijuana
Sure.
industry. We did that off of transparency being one thing there, and also that everyone had a voice. So I didn't care if you had 15 dispensaries, the largest cultivation facility, you're going to have the same voice and representation as the mom and pop shop that's there who's just trying to make ends meet. Because for this industry to work, it has to work for everybody and not just for a select few. And I think that was our success, and I think C4 is going to continue that success. They're going to keep growing larger, bigger, more predominant at the state capitol. They have wonderful leadership under the board of directors, and so even though I'm departing from this industry, at least in Colorado for now, C4 is going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to do what it was tasked with, to do, which is to empower Colorado's cannabis economy. And
Sure.
we're doing a phenomenal job, and they're going to keep doing a phenomenal job.
So when is your last day? Has it already happened? And where's the next step?
Yeah, so my last day has happened. So my last day was Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
So I got a free day, I guess, since Zoe works there. So yeah, that was the transition, and there's going to be some great transitions for C4 in place. I'm not going to mention who's going to be taking my position, but this industry is going to be very thankful. One thing that I've wanted to do to ensure that whoever takes my replacement is going to do a much better job than I could. and that's the whole point. You don't want to regress. You want to leave it in much better hands. And that's where C4's position, and that's what's going to happen. And so our members and folks who are considering become members, I tell them they're going to be in capable hands. And if you're not part of C4 yet, then you should jump on right now, because it's a wonderful organization to be a part of.
And you yourself are no longer in marijuana. You're going into another vice.
I am. Yeah. So that seems to follow me. That seems to, one thing I've positioned myself over these years here is, as myself being, as I started as a contract lobbyist, is taking on industries or issues that I hold near and dear to my heart, that I look at as a personal liberties and shouldn't be infringed on. And so I went from gaming to the liquor industry, and then jumped into the marijuana industry, and now I'll be jumping into the tobacco industry, representing premium cigars. And
premium cigars.
Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, and so roll all the vices into one, that do, and I saw a need there that this industry that I love too, that's near and near my heart, which are premium cigars, has been under attack across this country. And what better use of my talents and my use is to jump in there and defend something that I love personally and personally believe in.
I have to ask, the timing of this with everything that's happening in Cuba right now, is there some simpatico to the timing there?
No, I guess you can do whatever conspiracy theories people want, especially me jumping from marijuana into tobacco. That'll probably rile up the conjurings from a lot of folks into that. But no, it wasn't the timing from there. I think a lot of people, the misconceptions of the Cuban embargo, and then what's that going to mean for the tobacco industry and cigars. In reality, because it's illegal, people want it. And so I think if it does get lifted in there, there'll be the rush of the people wanting to try these items out, but then they're going to revert back to their original amount. Because me personally, I would prefer a Dominican cigar over a Cuban any day.
Really?
So
okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I know very little about cigars. So.
They're very interesting. One key fact a lot of people don't understand from premium cigars is it takes 3 years from seed to where it gets into the hand of a consumer. 3 years to make a premium cigar. So it's an art form. It's an art form, and unfortunately it gets lumped in for things like cigarettes and whatnot. But it's an industry that I hold near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to helping them address a lot of the issues they face.
Fascinating. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later,
Sure.
But looking back on your history, your tenure in the cannabis industry, I want to know what some of the big wins were for you, and whether those were legislative, regulatory, electoral, rulemaking. What are the things that you're going to look back and really be proud of the work that you did in this industry?
Sure. So there's a couple things that I'm really proud of. When I took this job, this was the very end of December 2014. Got asked to lead this, and it was, of course, session was starting, and I was not only at the time the executive director with the administrator membership development, but I was also the chief lobbyist. So there's a lot of stuff I had to do to hit the ground running when session started. And so actually, I think one of my greatest, that I'm most proud of achievements is within that very little time was we created the first reference library in the country for proficiency testing and methodologies for testing cannabis. And that was an issue here at state, because cannabis testing started on the recreational, didn't start on the medical for one reason or another. I still don't understand why it didn't start with medical first. But there was a problem with how product was being tested. The homogeneity of it, the residual solvents, the potencies. And as an industry group, we're tasked to protecting the licensed and regulated industry, but also the business interests. And so when we saw that, where we were required by law to put these test results on a label, if a testing facility provided the wrong results and they somehow got retested by somebody, that opens up a business to liability, to being sued by the consumer for false advertising on the labels when it comes to testing. So we needed to address that, but then we also knew that more likely our members who are licensed here, we're going to be looking at other states as well to jump into. And so to create an open library, so not a bricks and mortar, think of it as like a virtual library where any state could look at these proficiency standards and methodologies for testing, and they can use those so they're not having to rewrite the wheel. Colorado's already ahead, light years ahead of other states, so they can learn from us. And so I think for myself, I believe that was the greatest achievement. And that wasn't just from cultivators growing. This was hard work done from cultivators, dispensaries, edibles makers, and the laboratories who worked that, because having an inclusive organization that's not just exclusive there allows us to create better policy and a better business policy that works for everybody moving forward. So that's probably...
I remember that. Well, you're talking about potency testing, but also for microbials, contaminants, pesticides, all of that. And is that done? I remember reporting on the reference library when it was being created and when these workshops were happening, but is that finished?
We've had some hiccups, so it is up. The beta is there, and so there's new documents, I think, going in there every month. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for there, but yeah, it's up and running. People are using it. Hopefully other states are looking at this as well, especially now since California went recreational, and Nevada and stuff, and Florida went medical. So hopefully they can utilize the model that we did. Now, it's not completed, it's never going to be completed. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that it will continually be updated as proficiencies get better, as methodologies get honed in. It'll just be continually be updated. And so I think that's one of the greatest things that I've been able to see. And it didn't get as much play from there, but this was a huge win for consumer safety and for the industry moving forward.
That's a big deal. I'm passionate about testing. We've done a couple big testing stories where we've tested for potency, we've tested for pesticides, and found some people not behaving as they should. And thankfully, as we replicate those tests a year later, we're finding that people are learning lessons and getting better, and that's encouraging.
Exactly.
So hopefully this is a part of us moving forward in this testing conversation. Good for you.
Yeah.
I do love, though, that you've become this Mr. Vice. I mean, from gaming to liquor to weed and now to tobacco. I mean, can you tell us some of the noticeable similarities and differences in some of these vices that you've worked, especially in terms of what you do? You lobby. What are the similarities and differences there between pot and booze and gaming, at the very least?
Yeah, it's going back when we were, passed Amendment 64, and it was to regulate similar to alcohol. It wasn't regulate like alcohol, which gets thrown around a lot.
Sure.
And so there are, the nuances. There's the retail outlets where you have to be 21 and over to go in. Same with the liquor store, you have to be 21 over. But a lot of the things that have transpired in our industry, they really don't mingle together. So, in the liquor industry, we have a strict here in Colorado a 3-tier system. So you're not vertically integrated. And so we've seen that issue in England, where there's the manufacturer also owns bars, and you create these tied house where the cost to the consumer is much lower, but there's a lot heavier overconsumption of products and then a lot more public health issues there. So we didn't take that route with cannabis. I know the arguments earlier on before I came in here was if we keep it vertically integrated, that it'll be less likely to spread. We won't get the corporate dollars into the cannabis and the spread or whatnot. Testing is also a thing. There is voluntary testing in the alcohol industry, and things for recall matters. Not as robust as in the marijuana industry and whatnot and stuff. So, but there really isn't as many similarities as you would think, given the tasks that were similar to alcohol. I guess the other one is we're under the Colorado Department of Revenue for regulation. So there's the liquor enforcement under there, and there's the marijuana enforcement. So they share the Department of Revenue there. They try to do, I think, the tax structure similar, with the excise tax. There's an excise tax on alcohol, but the biggest difference there is in alcohol there's a flat tax, and in marijuana, of course, there's a fluctuating tax rate that is problematic, I think, for the industry moving forward. And I hope that the industry down the road looks at this and addresses this of this fluctuating tax rate, because that puts kind of a stinker, I like to say, on your business plans, especially when you don't know what the effective tax rate's going to be. In terms of tobacco moving there, I mean, your plant, I think tobacco's gone through a lot of in this in this country. You know, one thing a lot of people don't know is tobaccos, they're not allowed to lobby. They're banned from federal and state lobbying efforts. So they can monitor stuff, they can provide resources, but lobbying, yeah, that's a big no-no.
All right.
Of course, the marijuana industry now, as it's booming and across in California, is going to be a good example of the lobbying dollars that's going to go into influence, you know, government officials, especially since, you know, for the most part, people don't realize your elected officials know almost nothing about cannabis.
Yeah.
And so they need to be educated by the business owners of how to do this and influence. So,
do you think that cannabis is going to go a similar direction as tobacco? Do you think there will be a day when there's no lobbying allowed in the marijuana space?
You know, I hope not. I don't see that. You know, I think you know, the tobacco industry, they harm themselves by, you know, how they approach their consumers, and then, you know, the science around you know, secondhand smoke and the cancer rates with cigarette usage.
Sure.
I think you know, the liquor industry learned a valuable example from that, and hopefully the marijuana industry also learns a valuable example from that. It's always best to tell the truth right up front, and you know, it comes down to dollars and cents and showing that instead of trying to make things up. And this industry has done a phenomenal job of telling exactly the truth and how it is for this. And it's gone a long way with our state legislators. And I think the federal government also sees that as well. Colorado's done a phenomenal job. The folks who are in this industry have done a phenomenal job of educating lawmakers, working hand in hand with regulators for this industry, so it doesn't over-explode and it doesn't under-explode, that we're on a course that's works that's equitable for everybody involved.
Isn't that interesting though? Because if you haven't gone back to study, you know, what these, you know, tobacco alcohol companies were saying in their infancy, you know, but then you're watching Mad Men and you see the claims that were made, and now you know how ridiculous many of those claims were. It really does give you a unique perspective of marijuana, at least legal marijuana, since for the last 3-4 years here, for the most part, there's been science-based, fact-based, you know, information being thrown around in those important conversations, in the research, in the science, and in the legislature, and that's encouraging, I would say.
Oh yeah, no, definitely is. As I said, marijuana industry has learned some valuable examples from the other industries that deal in intoxicants, and I think. Hopefully moving forward, there's no hiccups or moving back pedaling there. You know, this industry has embraced all the positive and negative consequences of this industry. You know, you're not going to find anyone, you know, I challenge anyone to find anyone here in Colorado who says, you know, legalizing marijuana is the cure for any state's budget woes. Nobody's going to make that claim because it's not. But it's like duct tape. You know, it's a great tool to have, and everyone should have it in their toolbox because it helps fix a lot of things in there. So we'll see. We'll just see how the future holds. But you know, I think for the future of C4 that I'm leaving, and the future of just marijuana in Colorado here, it's upwards is where it's going to go. So, and I'm just proud to have been a part of it.
Well, Tyler, I wish you luck, and I always appreciate having you as a source.
Thank you.
Always a level-headed conversation, and we're going to chat here more in a few minutes on the show, but thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
I want to throw to our very own insider of indica, that's Professor Pat, for this week's entry in the new Cannabist lexicon.
Crystals. The common layman's term for the cannabis plant's trichomes. These tiny structures contain the vast majority of the plant's cannabinoids and are what is removed to create concentrates such as hash, hash oil, and keef. For example, that bud is covered in crystals, trichomes.
Thank you, Professor Pat. You learn something every day. Now it's time to bring out our second guest, who is a thoughtful writer closely following this legalization conversation that we talk about every week here on the show. It's my pleasure to welcome Cannabis Benchmark's editorial director, Adam Koh, to the Cannabist Show. Hey, man.
Hey, Ricardo.
Pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. We've communicated vaguely over the years, and this is the first time we're meeting. It's so great.
IRL.
IRL.
In the age of online communication.
No shit, isn't it weird?
It's odd, yes.
Oh, man. So, Adam.
Yes.
Sativa, indica, where are you on the spectrum?
You know, in my previous position, I was actually a grower managing a cultivation facility here, and in my experience growing and also, you know, partaking a little bit, I've sort of come to the opinion that those distinctions perhaps aren't as meaningful as we make them out to be right now.
Sure.
And because I've had the opportunity to grow the same strain under different conditions with different types of fertilization and what have you, and it changes the aroma, it changes the effects.
Interesting.
So it's obviously exciting times, and I think as research progresses, we'll get a fuller picture of how terpenes play a role, alkanes, all the different various compounds that I don't fully understand, that are better left to the chemists, how they affect us. And maybe that sativa indica question will be a little different in a couple years when you're doing this show.
It's interesting because, of course, we know that there's no true sativa, no true indica. It's like indica dominant. Most everything is a hybrid out there. Popular science tells us that. And we had Max Montrose from the Trichome Institute on the couch for like 6 weeks ago. And, of course, he just went off on that question and completely dismissed it. At the same time, Adam, you're an ex-grower. Now you write in the field. Do you agree that some marijuana makes you sleepy and some makes you energized?
I do agree, and also though I think you have to look at your own body chemistry at the time. I think everyone that's consumed cannabis has had the occasion where they've smoked a joint of Durban poison at one time and they get a nice rush, and then maybe another instance they get a little sleepy. So it's a lot of nuance, a lot of variables, I think, that go into everything. But for me, I guess to answer your original question in a sort of indirect way, I would prefer, now that I've been able to get out of the warehouse and see the industry more broadly, I really prefer sun-grown cannabis that's fertilized naturally, not with bottled nutrients, with sort of natural inputs, guano, kelp, things like that.
Sure.
And for me, that I think that results in the best product in the hands of a grower that really knows what they're doing.
I spent a lot of time in California in October doing a lot of reporting pre-election and everything, and it was cool and so fun to see how big sun-grown is out there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when you're in the shop, there's a distinction, and of course everything out there is still the Wild West. And in the meantime, we only have one county that allows outdoor cultivation in the state of Colorado, and so sun-grown is pretty unique here, especially because if you're growing your 6 plants, your 12 plants at home, you're not supposed to be growing it under the sun, even though some of my friends do.
Right, very
Props
different
to them,
from the West Coast, for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, catch us up on what's happening at Cannabis Benchmarks.
Yeah, of course. So Cannabis Benchmarks, we are an independent, unbiased price reporting agency. So, we have actually for over a year and a half now been publishing weekly market price assessments on wholesale cannabis flower. So separate from a company like BDS, which is focused on the retail side, we're focused on the supply side, producers of cannabis. And
multiple markets or Colorado only?
Multiple markets.
Okay.
We do a national volume weighted average, which is a little premature, obviously, because we don't have interstate commerce yet, but each week in our weekly reports, we cover California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. Those are the big four right now, of course. And then also we have good data on Arizona, Michigan, Nevada. Nevada's obviously a big up-and-coming state. And some other of the smaller medical markets as well. And just to sort of give some context, price reporting agencies are really a key feature in all commodity markets, right?
Sure.
So all agricultural products, oil and gas.
It's why Bloomberg is Bloomberg.
Right, exactly. and actually a good portion of the team is coming from that field, from places like S&P, Standard & Poor, and Platts, McGraw-Hill, and they're sort of the number crunchers that have brought their methods that they used in other commodity data areas and applied it to cannabis.
Okay.
And a lot of it is, to be perfectly frank, a little bit out of my depth. That's a little technical, but we do have, for those that are interested, we do have methodology documents on the website. So if you want to do a deep dive, that info's there. But really the goal is price transparency. And that's really important to making sure that the market's functioning efficiently and really that everyone's winning. So, to give an example, if you're going to buy a used car, right, you're not going to just take the price that the dealer offers
Sure.
you, right?
There's a thing called Kelley Blue Book that you might be checking.
There you go. Yeah, you're one step ahead of me. So you check the Kelley Blue Book for the make, model, the year. You go check out the car itself, if they change the oil and what have you. And then you can negotiate. You have a starting point, a reference point, and get to a place where there's a deal agreeable to both parties. Whereas if you didn't have that information, there's a good chance you might get ripped off, and that might be good for the dealer, but it's not good for the market in the long run.
Right.
So we're basically trying to do the same thing, and in the end, I think we'd like to be considered the Kelley Blue Book of cannabis. And it's something that really resonated with me from my previous experience working in the industry directly. We got to a point where we had expanded our cultivation operation, and we were starting to wholesale more on the open market. And I observed that it was hard to do deals sometimes because we were coming at it from one angle. We said, hey, this is our best stuff. We love it. All our patients love it in the dispensary we're integrated with. And we think maybe $2,800. Those were the good old days, I suppose.
I was going to say, that's not a modern number.
Right, no. I've been out for a little over a year and a half now. But yeah, but we'd have buyers coming to us saying, well, we never pay more than 18 or 16, which nowadays some people might be happy to have, but back then it was a little insulting sometimes. So, and we would get into these sort of stalemate negotiations because there was no reference point. There was no way to really meet in the middle or nowhere to jump off from. So, when I was first approached with this opportunity, I just thought, wow, I wish that I had that when I was a grower and I could see the value that it brought to the market.
Sure, yeah, no, you need that reference point. I think both sides, it just helps for an even playing field. And before we move on, what is the average per pound wholesale price in Colorado right now?
Right now in Colorado, we're tracking it around just above $1,400 per pound. So, a big difference from, like I said, a year or two ago when the recreational market opened and, demand was booming and some of the new licensees were still trying to come online. So we actually, this July, saw a big sort of price crash. And I think a lot of people were expecting it. Some people may have been lulled into thinking it might not happen, but, a lot of the big greenhouse operations that you sort of alluded to earlier down south in the Pueblo area
came online,
yeah.
Had some harvests.
Right, it doesn't happen overnight, of course. So, even though the market, they might have gotten their license in 2014 sometime, they had to raise capital, they had to build, and then they had to get going and hit their stride. But they did this summer, and the prices dropped precipitously.
And has it leveled out, steadied? Has it risen since July?
It has leveled out for the most part. And the holiday time is, last year we saw this as well around the Thanksgiving and the Christmas, New Year's period. That's a time when demand goes up a little. People are off of work, socializing more. And then, as you get later into the winter, you get the more tourists coming in. So, we had that big rush of supply in the summer, but, it leveled off eventually, and we actually, the last couple weeks, saw a little bump over, in the lead up to Thanksgiving.
What's funny is in the last couple weeks, I definitely found myself stocking up.
Oh, yeah?
You have friends and family coming in from out of town. You're busy as hell during the holidays. I don't have time to go over to the pot shop.
So need a little break.
Adam, you and I first met online when you were writing about pesticides. I was writing about pesticides. This is one of our shared passions, and I really appreciated your writing that you did on that.
Thank you.
I want to know if you think Colorado or any other states have started to figure out this pesticide issue. Where do you think we're at with it?
Well, it's hard to figure something out when you don't have all the information that you need to make an informed decision, right? And the unfortunate thing is, due to, the decades of drug war rhetoric and the, pretty unfair, I think in all respects, classification as a Schedule I substance, we just haven't had the opportunity to do research on cannabis like we do with other crops. And how pesticides might be able to be used in a safe manner. So, you know, given that knowledge gap, I think that, you know, the CDA, who is sort of primarily tasked with developing the pesticide policies, I
That's
think
the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, sorry,
No worries.
Department
You're
of
good.
Agriculture. I think they've taken the best possible course here. And, you know, there's something that is a little more prevalent in Europe. It's called the precautionary principle. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not, no.
It's sort of a philosophy to guide regulatory decisions that might affect public health or environmental issues. So basically the gist of it is...
Better safe than sorry, maybe.
There you go, yeah. You know, when a new product or services or process is being introduced, you know, if there's a potential for a public health impact or a negative environmental impact, we need to wait and see conclusive data before it's adopted. And so in Europe, they're a little more inclined to take that position. For example, in Western Europe, they haven't really accepted genetically modified crops like we have here in the United States. They're still waiting on data even after 20 years. So, you know, it's a different view, and I think that sort of view has governed the CDA and also the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, the CDPHE. You know, we just don't know, but the CDA did identify, you know, that class of minimum risk products where it's legal to use those according to our federal pesticide laws. They don't necessarily say that they're safe, but, you know, that's the option we have, and sort of, you know, like Tyler said, we're sort of put in these positions where, you know, we have to sort of find this best path to tread. And right now, given what we don't know, I think that, you know, that's the good stance. You know, I think more could be done in terms of maybe enforcement, inspection, and getting the testing program, which I know is under construction, off the ground. But, you know, these are really complex issues, and I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, being overly critical, because it takes a long time to figure out these laboratory processes and sampling procedures and everything, and making sure they're right and they're effective and they're not too burdensome on the market participants.
It's a good point to make, though. We still do not have a state-sanctioned lab to test for pesticides, even though the 3 other areas of potency and microbials and contaminants have been tested for in some cases, years in this state, and we're still waiting on pesticides.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting to, I don't know how much you've been following Oregon, but
yeah, some interesting things happening up there for sure.
Yeah, so Oregon's had an interesting couple Octobers, the last 2. This October, I guess, to sort of stay on topic here, on October 1st, they introduced really strict pesticide testing regulations, more stringent than really anything that any other state's done to this point. They're screening for 59 separate chemicals.
Oh, wow. And down to parts per billion, or?
They're depending on the individual chemical, there's different action levels. And then they're also having lab representatives pull samples instead of the producers themselves. And then finally, the other thing they're doing different than Colorado is a maximum 10-pound batch size. So, you know, here in Colorado, through the metric system, you can, a batch could be 1 pound or it could be 200 pounds, right? And in Oregon, even if you're cutting down 200 pounds at a time, you're going to have to divvy that up, and each 10 pounds is going to have to clear screening before it can be allowed to be transferred to a retail store. And so, you know, that was interesting to see this October when, like we said, on the West Coast with the sun grown, that's usually a time when supply's flooding in and prices are going down. But in Oregon, with this testing regime being put in place, we actually saw where Washington and California, you know, were going like this, Oregon was going like this, because the testing was taking longer. There weren't enough labs online initially because the requirements for the labs were very stringent to meet, and it took a little longer than anticipated. So when the stores opened on October 1st, there were I think maybe around 6 or 8 labs operational, and they were just getting slammed with product. And so the product was sort of trickling out on the other side very slowly. Supply was tight.
I've heard from colleagues
prices
there
were going up.
It's really affected the concentrates market.
Yeah, that as well. You know, right now with benchmarks, we're focused on flower, but speaking to you know, some industry group leaders up there, sort of the analog to what Tyler does. Yeah, the concentrates are definitely, they're being subjected to really strict standards as well, and it's really expensive. But you know, I think there's something to be said for just sort of ripping the Band-Aid off, maybe, you know, because they are going through a growing pains period right now, and I'm sure that, you know, a lot of the producers and the processors are having a tough time, and you know, I do feel for them because I've been through those big regulatory shifts as a grower myself.
Sure.
But you know, I think once they get through this, it'll be a lot smoother sailing, rather than perhaps trying to implement standards retroactively, you know, as is the case in California, where people have been doing their thing for, you know, 20 years now, and I don't envy anyone in that market trying to shape that up.
Oh no, especially with all that outdoor growing. There's a lot more pests outside than there is inside a warehouse. But I look forward to seeing what Colorado ends up doing and what we pick from Oregon, what we don't.
Right.
But one thing I definitely wanted to talk with you about, since you're here, something we've talked about before. You have an interesting theory that you're not so sure that the commercial legalization course that Colorado has taken is the right one, and I want to dig in because I want to hear your thoughts on what's wrong with the current system and what could have been done better.
Yeah. So that's a big issue. We could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, we
could. You know, at the risk of sounding like one of the what is it, the SAM.
Project Sam.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, you know, I'm
big anti-legalization
right.
group.
I'm not really of that mind. You know, I think, you know, I'm definitely a legalization proponent. I don't think anyone should ever go to jail for carrying a reasonable amount of cannabis for their needs, whether, you know, medical or adult use. I think people, you know, in an ideal world, people should be able to grow a few plants in their garden if they want. Obviously, there's some complications to that, but you know, eventually we get there. And you know, in general, I think I'm of a similar mind to Tyler, that, you know, people should be free to do what they want as long as they know the risks and they are okay with them, and as long as they're not hurting anyone else, you know. So, you know, unfortunately, things aren't that simple in the real world, because every action does have consequences, and you know, this is what people voted on, and this is where we are, so we really have to make the best of it.
And I know it's kind of a big question, but like getting narrow, especially with how quickly we moved through that rulemaking process. I mean, we voted in November 2012 and shops were open 13 months later.
That's true.
And I get the impression you think that might have been a little bit quick. Of course, Washington State took 5.5 months longer than we did to start the sales.
Too. And I mean, they didn't necessarily avoid the problems even taking a little longer.
Sure.
So, you know, we're in uncharted territory. So hindsight's 2020. It's easy for me to sit here and say there's problems. Maybe we should have done things differently. I think really, you know, rather than recommending anything, you know, specific, because, you know, obviously I can't see the future. I can't really see how anything would work out. I think something that would really be beneficial overall, and you know, some people are absolutely taking this tact already, but there's an idea called Socratic ignorance. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
So, you know, the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, you know, the way Plato tells it, there was an oracle that said Socrates is the wisest man in Greece, and then when he was presented with that idea, he said, well, you know, that's funny, I didn't know that. And he tries to figure out why that would be the case. And he comes to the conclusion that he's not wise because he knows more than everyone else, but he's aware of what he doesn't know. And he acknowledges his own ignorance.
Sure.
And so he always is asking questions, and trying to fill the gaps in his knowledge. And
Yeah, I'm familiar with the idea.
right,
Okay.
yeah. So, we are, again, sort of the pesticide situation's a microcosm of that. We're in this situation with cannabis where the anecdotal evidence for the medical side is extremely compelling and really, powerful. We have some great preliminary studies that point to some really positive outcomes, but I think if you ask people in those fields, they'll all tell you that we don't have any definitive conclusions based on hard data yet, right? And it's going to take, in some cases, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years or longer to really figure out the full effects of what we're doing here. So, this is an experiment, and as we move forward, I just think that we have to really sort of similar to what you and Tyler were discussing. It's an exciting time. There's so much promise, but we have to guard against sort of this overriding optimism and perhaps make sure we don't overstate something to the detriment of having a possible negative outcome come back and bite us in the future. Because I really appreciate your sort of measured take on it. It's really great to hear that's sort of the message that's being conveyed to lawmakers, but then you do hear some statements like cannabis is safer than alcohol. And, of course you're not going to overdose on cannabis, that's for sure, but that's also a very vague statement, right? So is it safer when one individual might be consuming, 2 or 3 glasses of wine a week compared to an individual that's dabbing 2 or 3 times a day, which is safer? I don't know.
Yeah, it's relative.
We don't have the research, and I think we just have to, there's going to be some people that are against legalization no matter what, and there's obviously the advocates that feel strongly, and then there's that group in the middle. And for speaking to those people that are ready to consider evidence and sort of make an informed decision, I think we have to say to them, look, there's a lot of compelling reasons to legalize cannabis, but we don't have all the answers, but we're committed to doing this experiment responsibly and cautiously and just making sure that it's as beneficial to as many people as possible and not sort of, again, replicating a situation like what happened with tobacco, because, and I hope this doesn't happen, but if there are perhaps a public health problem or something like that a decade or so down the road, then that just gives ammunition to the anti-cannabis types to say, hey, you lied to us and blah, blah, blah. And maybe there is sort of a backlash. Again, that's a worst case scenario. I'm sort of a worrywart.
Well, you're reasoned, and going back to our pal Socrates, I think it's important to acknowledge, as we do all the time on the show, that there's still more that we don't know about this plant than what we do know.
Tip of the iceberg.
It's so fascinating. I was just looking through some of a buddy of mine went to school in Texas in the 70s, and he gave me all these like pamphlets basically that he was given as a student about drugs, and the marijuana ones are amazing, and they acknowledged then the issues with research, and here we are 40 years later, and there are still very real issues with research, and I couldn't agree more with what you said about the pesticide stuff, because as we're reporting about this, it's like, okay, these people are getting caught using pesticide chemicals that are not okay for this plant. Do we know that they're going to harm you if you inhale them and expose them to flame? No, we don't. But that might be something that you learn 20, 30 years down the line when these people try to procreate and sudden issues come up, as has happened with other pesticide issues in the decades past. So and I think it's important to acknowledge all that stuff. Yeah,
the unfortunate thing too is just the amount of time it takes and the amount of money it takes too to do that sort of research. So, hopefully, I know there's already, down at CSU Pueblo, they're starting sort of a cannabis research center. So there is that commitment happening, and I think that's probably one of the most important things that the industry can do. is just drive the research forward, stay open-minded, and be, you know, honest about the scientific findings that come forward, and, you know, we can use that to make good decisions and make legalization work.
I remember when I first took this job, I really did a deep dive because I wasn't super knowledgeable about marijuana coming into this, and talking to public health experts, it was fascinating learning about some of those massive studies involving tens of thousands of people that were conducted in the 60s and 70s, which is why we know what we know about alcohol and tobacco, and we desperately need those for marijuana, and we won't have them for a while, and you're right. I mean, in many ways, it comes back to that really off-tone public education campaign that the governor tried to do with the lab rat cages. Don't be a lab rat. Well, we are lab rats in many ways.
A little bit, yeah.
You know, given what we know, but we're moving forward. Tyler, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I mean, you've been on the front lines of cannabis legislation for 2 years. Adam, clearly you've been paying a lot of attention to this, so I want to know what each of you guys think is the next big issue that Colorado weed is going to face, whether it's in the state legislature, whether it's in the movement against legalization. Tyler, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot that, you know, for this industry, I mean, since it's so new, I mean, everything is a huge step. But, you know, moving forward, you know, for this industry, I'd like to mention, you know, one of the biggest accomplishments, you know, so far from this election cycle was the defeat of Initiative 200 in Pueblo. You know, that would have had such a detrimental effect on Pueblo's economy, but on just the movement in general across the country. You know, that would have been the playbook for groups like Project SAM and Smart Colorado here to take that to other states and around the local municipalities here in Colorado and just be a domino effect.
And that's a good point. Just in case our listeners weren't following, there were some activists in a southern Colorado city that tried to block all recreational pot licenses, and they failed. So,
yes.
yeah, that was a big one.
Failed, and now they're going to have a pot museum now.
The National
now
Marijuana Museum,
there.
yeah.
But you know, I think moving forward, since, you know, our next legislative session starts in January here, you know, there's two things that I look at as the biggest one. I think, well, first of all, the biggest one I think is going to be the consumption, social consumption of marijuana in a public place. We saw that with Initiative 300 here, and then we also, you know, saw some of, you know, the back end playing of that, of you know, with the state working behind the scenes to prohibit liquor, people who hold a liquor license from allowing the consumption of cannabis. You know, that rule was adopted by Liquor Enforcement Division, you know, to kind of stem that tide, you know, from Denver here, which you know, is something that needs to be addressed and looked at for the state. Is we need some place for tourists and people outside their homes to go and consume socially, and they do it in a responsible manner. You know, a vast number of folks who live in who don't own their own homes, who live in apartments, townhomes, and whatnot, where it's strictly prohibited from using these products on site. They need a place. We have that for alcohol. We have those for premium cigars, where you can
yes,
go
we do.
for there. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But I think the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish that is to put an exemption in the Colorado Clean Indoor Smoking Act to allow that. And you know, that's a heavy lift for a lot of folks, not just in the cannabis industry here, but for regulators, people from the American Heart Association, Lung Association, people who fought so vehemently to remove tobacco from places like restaurants and bars and casinos. But this is something that needs to be addressed, and it'll be a heavy lift, but I believe the industry can accomplish it.
Interesting. Okay.
I also think tax reform too is something that's key, and if it doesn't happen this year, it needs to be looked at, just because for general business implications, having a fluctuating tax rate, it's no way to do business, and especially if we're supposed to be regulated similar to alcohol. I think a flat tax rate's important, so that's something that this industry should look at. You know, the governor's has a big push, you know, you've seen, of going after the gray and black market. I think that's going to be huge, and that's going to be something the industry really needs to keep on their toes to ensure that it doesn't encroach, any policy doesn't encroach on the licensed and regulated industry, but it also protects the caregivers who are doing it right, who are in areas who their local municipalities have prohibited medical or recreational, you know, ensuring that those folks aren't left in the dark.
And that's a good point. I mean, there's three solid points. That last one, I'm curious though, as a lobbyist, when you see the governor of Colorado addressing these gray market, black market cultivations, do you watch that and say, wow, this could encroach on the legal market?
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, looking at working for C4 and getting to know all these businesses across the state of Colorado and outside of Colorado, It does a little bit worrisome because we kind of sit in a little bubble here, and if you look at those same news articles and you're living in places like Iowa or you're living in North Carolina, South Carolina, illegal black market, gray market, licensed regulated product, it's all the same. And that's the worry too, is being able to differentiate the two. I think it is an issue, it is a problem. A lot of people want to kind of just put it under the rug over there, but we're surrounded by states that don't have medical or recreational marijuana, and there are going to be positive and negative consequences, and the negative consequence of this is Colorado now being in the middle of the country, it does make it easier and more profitable for folks to grow illegal product and ship this to other states, especially on the East Coast. It's something that this industry sees and knows it's a threat there because just in generalities, legal weed, illegal weed, to some people outside of Colorado, people don't pay attention, it's all the same.
Sure.
And so being very cautious and sure that we're not encroaching on these businesses is going to be key, but it's also supporting the efforts to ensure that black market product is not making its way on the streets, because your black market dealer doesn't care if you're under the age of 21. You don't know how this product is grown, you don't know where it's grown. These people are just growing to produce a large quantity of product and ship it out of state. And so I think the governor's got his work cut out for him, and I hope the industry can get behind what he's doing, but ensuring that they're protecting the rights of businesses and they're protecting the rights of the legitimate caregivers who are doing a phenomenal job. So,
Adam, what are your thoughts? One or two of these next big issues that Colorado weed is going to be facing here in the next legislature, but also, beyond?
Yeah, I think looking beyond and picking up on something Tyler mentioned about the tax structure, because our regulated industry here in Colorado was really built on indoor operations, right? There was no greenhouse, there was really no legal outdoor at the outset, and so the rules were written to tailor to what people were doing. But like I sort of mentioned earlier this year, with the way prices are going and the influence that these big greenhouse and outdoor operations in southern Colorado are having, the market's changing, and I think some of the rules, particularly around taxation, are going to have to be examined. And it's interesting to look in California, even though their statewide system is still under construction, some of the local governments in places like Humboldt and Mendocino County that have those long histories of cannabis cultivation, they're imposing tax rates on growers not by a percentage of a sale price, but by the square footage of their canopy. So, $1 per square foot of canopy for outdoor growers, $3 for indoor growers.
So when you talk about taxation, you're talking about wholesale?
Yes, on the wholesale side. And so...
Because then there's 280E on the
right,
retail
yeah, no,
side.
I'm not even going to get into that. But yeah, it's something that, with the way that prices went this year in Colorado, growers are actually paying a higher effective tax rate because that rate was set earlier in the year when prices were higher. And so after they fell, if you're not getting $1,800 per pound for your product, which was what the rate was based on for the second half of this year, which is not the market reality at this point, then you're getting taxed higher than that 15% effectively. And so, like Tyler said, we'll have to see how the market sort of transforms itself. Keep an eye on California and Oregon and some of these other places with the new approaches that they're trying. And if sun-grown and other sort of methods do become more prevalent here, maybe there has to be, a significant restructuring. And again, for what we're doing with benchmarks, it was really exciting. We normally keep our subscriber information confidential, but this is actually a case where it became public knowledge. Outside of us, the administrators in Mendocino County, it came out in a board of supervisors meeting there that they were using our price assessments to sort of help formulate an appropriate tax rate where, they could bring in the revenue that they desire to the county, but that they were also not taking too big of a chunk out of the growers' revenues.
Sure, okay,
so,
that's pretty progressive.
Yeah. So, it's like I said, it's an ongoing thing, and I don't know that anyone has definitive answers at this point. We just have to continue to listen and be responsive and, try to collect as much information as possible so we can make those good decisions.
Well, I have a follow-up for both of you guys, because I was on NPR the other day and I think they asked me the same thing, and I was like, the next big issue, just pulled the first thing off the top of my head, and I was like, potency. Potency, big issue this last year. Industry, rallied around, raised a ton of money, fought the issue, fought it down. Do you guys see this issue of this increasing marijuana flower potency and, of course, very high concentrates and extracts potency being a concern for the industry, but also for the opposition? Tyler?
Oh, you want to go there? That was very interesting when that came up the last legislative session around potency, which really, it put the industry on guard, had to stand their toes for there, because there was an initiative that got filed to try to cap potency, and it was at least interesting for us in the industry folks there, because the individuals pushing this cap on potency, when you asked them to explain what potency was, they couldn't provide an answer for you. But it's a great soundbite to put out a high number like 99%, and make it sound dangerous and get people to be like, oh, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds scary. And because marijuana is still taboo, unfortunately, across this country, I don't know what it means, but it's a high number. It's got to be bad. Unfortunately, it comes down to it's the same thing we go to alcohol. It's like a difference between beer to wine to spirits.
Sure.
All have different alcohol contents. You all have different amounts of consumption there, but it all comes down to the responsibility of the consumer to use those products there. And again, at least I guess the science is on our side, because really there is no science from there, and so there's no way to definitively say if it's a danger for you. But I think the defeat at the initiative was a good jumping off point for us. I think maybe the industry will see some type of legislation next year. I don't see it catching any legs. And the reason being for that is after this election, we have a divided chambers. The Senate maintained Republican, the House remained Democrat. I know for C4's position, we're very happy to see that there, because that means the extreme legislation from either side of the aisle, from the right side or the left, isn't going to get passed. Everything has to be brought to a compromise to get any sensible regulations, and capping potency just isn't sensible. There's no definitive argument to why we need to do that. It comes down to consumer education, and I think
Sure.
the state with the Good to Know campaign, and plus the industry itself doing self-regulatory practices is where it needs to be. And so if it does come, I think it would die a quick death in the first committee that was put in. So,
Adam, what's your thought? You think potency has a chance at being a thorn in the industry's side?
It might get brought up again, but I'm of the same mind as Tyler. There's not really any good arguments, and I think as the public in general becomes more educated about cannabis, that the potency sort of scare tactic will become less and less effective. I know in my own personal experience as a grower, I had the opportunity to bring up the crops, have them tested, and then I would do a little sampling, make sure the product was okay, and
A little bit of quality control.
Exactly, but there were times when we had a batch come back at around 30% THC, and that product didn't hit me as hard as a batch that tested at 19% THC, and so that sort of goes back to the beginning of our conversations. What else is going on here that's bringing these effects
affecting
about
our body and
right.
our minds?
And then again, from the grower's perspective, it's just not a realistic idea in general, because we're not manufacturing widgets here. We're not making 200 milligram tablets of ibuprofen. We're growing plants, and they're living beings. And as even with the most consistent, well-run operations, you're going to have some variability. And so, are you going to make a grower throw out a whole crop because it's 17% THC versus 16%, when in the end we don't even really know if that's a meaningful difference?
Sure.
So, like I said, it's something I think born of just lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, and as things move forward, it'll be a less effective scare tactic for those that might try to want to undermine the industry in that way.
I appreciate both of your guys' take on it.
Yeah.
I could have been wrong when I gave that answer, but you guys, it's time for the pot quiz.
Oh.
This is all current events, all the time, 2 questions apiece. If you get the wrong answer, you can steal the point and vice versa.
Okay.
Tyler, first question's coming to you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
And this actually comes from the quick hit. So viewers, listeners, you guys know this answer. You guys don't, because we don't listen to the quick hit in the studio. But Tyler, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper hopes to use how much of the state's marijuana tax revenues to fight homelessness?
Oh, man.
A,
Okay.
8.2 million, B, 10.7 million, C, 12.3 million, D, 15.1 million.
Oh man, because I just saw this the other day, and I was reading over the Joint Budget Committee report. I think it's D.
D,
Is it D, 15? Yeah,
15.1
1
million.
million.
No, that is the wrong
man, I really
answer.
thought theirs. Okay, you go for the
Adam
steal.
for the steal.
I got a little easier, but I'm going to say C, 12.3.
Ding is right.
got it.
Yes, good.
I knew it was in the
guess.
tens. I knew it was in the
Sorry.
double digits.
You helped me out a little bit there. So.
There you go. Well, now you can pay him back if you want to, Adam,
Okay.
unless you get this point as well. Are you ready for the next question?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Legalization opponents in Maine have requested a recount on the ballot initiative that narrowly legalized recreational cannabis use. How long will that recount take, according to the state's Department of the Secretary of State? A, 2 to 3 weeks. B, 4 to 6 weeks. C, 8 to 10 weeks. D, 12 to 14 weeks.
I read about this last week. I think it's B, 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow, you're on fire,
Yeah.
dude. Okay, props.
It's my
Somebody
job.
did their studying.
Yeah.
I know, Tyler's moved on. He's
moved
like,
on
"Oh,
already, yeah.
where's the cigar?
I've already checked
Where's the
out.
cigar questions, right?
Tyler, next question goes to you.
This could be embarrassing. If my last year.
Here you go. You have an opportunity to make up for it. The U.S. Supreme Court this week refused to take up an appeal from a Native American church that wants to be exempt from federal marijuana laws. In what MMJ legal state is the Native American church located in? So this is a medical legal state.
Oh man. You know, I just breezed over that when it was on CNN and stuff. A medical legal state for the church, Cannabis Church. Oh man, I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna get this one wrong, but is it Montana? I didn't hear the ding. I didn't hear the ding. I'm already out of here. I'm done.
You can still steal the next question. Adam, you have a guess?
Yeah, and this is going to be a guess. This is a tough one.
It is a tough one. I apologize.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Tough quiz.
Michigan?
No. Hawaii.
Hawaii. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
yes. Yes. I couldn't
Can I get
pronounce
half a point because I was the closest, maybe? Got last
closest geographically.
These were way easier when there were a lot less MMJ legal states.
That's
too.
true,
That
too.
is,
Yeah,
that's true.
no
That's true.
doubt, right? Well, this one's a little bit simpler. Adam,
Okay.
last question of the pot quiz. A recreational pot shop in what 420 legal state has delayed its mid-December opening after the store was broken into on, of all days, Thanksgiving?
Is this Oregon?
No.
No? Oh, man.
No. To Tyler for the
Right.
steal.
That's broken
It's a
in.
recreational
This is
pot
your
shop.
moment.
This is mine while I was comatose from Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I don't remember
I took a
anything
break
from
from the
Thanksgiving.
news then.
They were about to open in mid-December, and now they're having to postpone because they were broken into. $5K worth of technology stolen on Thanksgiving.
Wow. For recreational? In a recreational state from opening. Is it Oregon?
He guessed Oregon.
Oh, did he guess Oregon? Oh. Never me paying attention. I'm already checked out. Swear I'm not
give
under
him
the
another
influence on there. I think that's delayed. That's a recreational state. Trying to think. Oh, well, they haven't opened yet. They haven't opened. So you leave Colorado, Alaska. You know what? I'm just. I should say Colorado, but you know what? I'm gonna go Alaska since they opened.
Oh,
there we
get
go.
the point. Pulls it out.
There we go.
Nice.
Pulls it out. Perfect.
You guys, thanks so much. Awesome
you, Ricardo.
conversation. Such a
Appreciate it.
pleasure
Yeah.
meeting you. Dude,
Oh,
great to
thank
see
you
you
so
guys.
much.
Absolutely. I want to thank my guests, Tyler Henson and Adam Koh, but most importantly, thanks to you all for watching, listening, and reading. So appreciate it. So I'm Ricardo Baca, joined by producers Vince, Don, and the rest of the crew. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next week.
I'm allowed to lose, I choose to win, I'm all in, I'm calling any posse you'll be raising at the end, I say it again, ain't afraid to get in, I be going for the jackpot with ace in my hand, I'm raw.